In July 1876, the United States was throwing itself a massive birthday party. This is a stereoscopic photograph of the Centennial Exposition in Philadelphia, packed with crowds celebrating 100 years of progress. The nation felt invincible, especially when expanding its borders westward. But that invincibility was shattered in early July when news crawled across telegraph wires from the Dakota Territory. The 7th Cavalry, the Army's elite frontier unit, had been completely wiped out. It was the worst military disaster in the history of the West. To understand how this happened, we have to look at the landscape where the conflict ignited. These are the Black Hills. In 1868, the U.S. government signed a treaty guaranteeing this land to the Lakota and Cheyenne. But 6 years later, a surveying expedition discovered gold here. Word got out, miners flooded in, and the government simply stopped enforcing its own treaty. Instead of removing the trespassing miners, Washington issued an ultimatum to the indigenous populations. They had until January 31, 1876, to abandon their unceded hunting grounds and report to reservations. Anyone who refused would be designated hostile and face military force. The government engineered this conflict to prioritize miners over treaties, gambling that a quick military strike would force the Lakota and Cheyenne to concede their territory and surrender their autonomy. The man tasked with enforcing this ultimatum was Lieutenant General Philip Sheridan. He believed in overwhelming force. Sheridan devised a massive spring campaign to trap the Lakota and Cheyenne and force them onto the reservations. This map illustrates his mechanical approach. Sheridan ordered 3 distinct columns of infantry and cavalry to converge on the region from the south, the east, and the west. They would march toward a central zone near the Bighorn River, creating a giant pincer movement to physically surround the tribes. But the operation hinged on an assumption. The military believed the moment the indigenous camps realized soldiers were approaching, they would instantly scatter and run. On the ground, the reality was entirely different. Rather than fleeing, thousands of Lakota, Cheyenne, and Arapaho had coalesced into an enormous, unified village. Guided by leaders like Sitting Bull, seen here in this portrait, they were prepared to stand and defend their families and their way of life. This strategic mismatch between a roundup mentality and a defensive reality meant the U.S. Army was deploying a net when it was actually walking into a lion's den. The first crack in Sheridan's machine happened on June 17th. General George Crook, commanding the Southern Column, was marching up the Rosebud River when he was suddenly intercepted by a massive force of warriors led by Crazy Horse. The 6-hour fight brought the U.S. advance to a grinding halt. The coordination and ferocity of the indigenous fighters exhausted Crook's supplies and forced him into a complete retreat. In one afternoon, an entire third of the U.S. offensive was knocked off the board. Look at what this does to the map. The southern vector shatters and disappears. But in an era of slow frontier communication, the commanders of the other columns, General Alfred Terry and Lieutenant Colonel George Custer, were miles away. They had no idea Crook had been defeated. Operating under the illusion that the trap is still intact, Custer and his 7th Cavalry detach from Terry's infantry and push ahead. His singular arrow pushes alone into the target zone toward the Little Bighorn River. On the morning of June 25th, Custer's Arikara and Crow scouts climbed a high ridge called the Crow's Nest. Looking down into the valley, they saw pony herds so vast they looked like worms in the grass. They warned Custer directly that the village ahead was the largest they had ever seen. Custer brushed off their concerns. The first domino had fallen. He was now marching a solo force into a concentrated enemy position, entirely stripped of the backup he thought was covering his flank. As Custer approached the Greasy Grass, the native name for the Little Bighorn River, he wasn't afraid of losing a fight. Looking at this portrait of him in uniform, you see a man supremely confident in his cavalry. Instead, he was terrified that the massive village would spot the dust from his horses, pack up, and scatter before he could strike. To prevent this escape, Custer makes his most notorious tactical error. Before properly scouting the terrain or confirming the exact location of the camp, he split this roughly 600-man regiment into 4 isolated battalions. He orders them to fan out and strike from multiple directions. What he didn't realize was the scale of the target. This encampment stretched for miles along the river. It contained over 1,000 teepees and roughly 8,000 people, dwarfing the fragmented cavalry units approaching it. Custer orders Major Marcus Reno, shown in this illustration, to take his battalion of 140 men, cross the river, and charge directly into the southern end of the massive camp. The goal was to shock the village and spark the retreat Custer was so certain would happen. Custer's decision to splinter his command turned his own tactical formation into its own greatest vulnerability, ensuring his troops were too far apart to support one another when the attack began. When Reno's men charged into the valley, the village stood its ground. This is a portrait of Red Horse, a Minneconjou Lakota chief who was digging wild turnips when the attack began. Like Chief Gall and other war leaders, they immediately mobilized, mounting a counterattack to defend their families. Facing hundreds of charging warriors, Reno's offensive immediately collapsed. He halted his men, dismounted, and formed a skirmish line, surrendering all momentum. Within minutes, panic set in. Reno ordered a retreat back across the river and up the steep bluffs, suffering heavy casualties as his battalion lost all organization. The mechanical consequence of this rout was devastating. Look at the map. With Reno's battalion pinned on the bluffs and completely neutralized, thousands of highly mobile warriors were suddenly free. That entire defensive force pivoted and surged north, directly toward Custer's position. Custer's 5 companies were caught alone on a ridge east of the river. Cut off from his other battalions and vastly outnumbered, his command was completely enveloped. In a matter of hours, every single man in Custer's immediate detachment was wiped out. The destruction of the 7th Cavalry followed a clear sequence of tactical isolation and a failure to account for an enemy that possessed both superior numbers and high motivation. Days later, General Terry arrived to find the bodies. This is a page from his confidential report, detailing how the careful plans fell apart. The supply steamboat Far West raced downriver day and night to telegraph this news back to the East Coast. The American public read the headlines in disbelief. While celebrating a century of progress, they struggled to process how an elite cavalry regiment had been defeated by a force they considered inferior. To cope with the embarrassment and protect military reputations, the narrative began to shift. Driven in part by his widow, Elizabeth Custer, shown here in this portrait with her husband, the accounts were rewritten. Custer's tactical choices were framed as a glorious, heroic last stand. That myth had brutal consequences. The national outrage fueled a relentless military retaliation. Within a year, the Army broke the indigenous resistance and seized the Black Hills by force, ending the way of life Sitting Bull had fought to protect. The Battle of the Little Bighorn serves as a case study in overconfidence. It illustrates what happens when military planning ignores local intelligence and relies on the assumption that an opponent will comply with a flawed strategy.